having my leg chopped off was like I was being reborn. Like I'd had a injury years and years ago, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. I was bedbound, and then I had it off, and suddenly I could do everything like completely normally. So like for me, that was a huge relief having it off. Like it's changed me completely. It's a good thing. It's purely in a good way. I got injured in 2012. I was in the army, fell over. I felt my leg, what I thought would happen, I thought my leg had broken. So I carried on because that's what you do. 2 weeks later, it was still black and swollen. And I was like, something's not right. So I went to the med centre. And at that point, I didn't have a scan or anything. The doctors never scanned me. He said, no, you've got shin splints. But in the army, you can't really, the doctors, they're right and everyone else is wrong.
They have the final word.
So when I initially got injured, they just never saw it because I never had a scan. I never went to the pain doctors. I never saw a pain specialist. The doctors didn't know what they were looking for and basically did everything wrong and just made it a lot worse than if I'd been treated properly. When I heard that, I was kind of my lowest. Like I was just angry, like the world hated me kind of because I'd only ever wanted to be in the army. That was like everything for me. I'd lost that. Then when I heard that, it was like, all right, where do I go from here? The weirdest thing is I walked in to get my own leg amputated. So I walked into the hospital, pushing a wheelchair with the stump board on it ready to have my leg amputated. But yeah, walking in there, I was fine. Like literally, I was excited. And then went under the knife. 2 hours later, woke up and I've not had any pain since. It was just the biggest like relief ever.
That's quite a lot to take on as a person to give yourself the label of disabled and chronically ill. How have you like come to that decision to use both, and how do you intertwine them if you do?
Well, I've called myself chronically ill for many years because I have been symptomatic since I was about 10 years old, and then by the time I had years of it, I just realized that I was chronically ill. At the time, I didn't have a proper diagnosis, and I kind of thought in my naive way that it would go away. And then once I got my diagnosis, I didn't get my diagnosis until I was 23 years old. I realized that it was not going to go away and it was genetic. And having the diagnosis really gave me some kind of validity to my symptoms. And I also realized quite a lot of things that I thought everyone experienced. I thought it was really normal to hate standing up. I thought it was really normal for everyone to be in pain and exhausted when they stood up. Even when I got my diagnosis, I still just called myself chronically ill because I didn't think I was quote unquote disabled enough. I didn't think I was bad enough, ill enough to be called disabled. No, I'm not disabled. I'm not in a wheelchair. I also thought, disabled equals wheelchair. And so many people have it worse. I can do things. I was at university at the time. I do sports, and then after a little bit longer in the sort of chronically ill and disabled space online, like I met a lot of friends and followed people who were also chronically ill and disabled, and realizing that they identify as disabled and I'm very much like them, and what disabled actually means. I was like, no, I am disabled. I can call myself disabled. And I did a lot of research, and it took a lot of time even mentally to come to that, because in society we see disabled as this bad thing. I realized that it's not a bad thing. You can have, it's not this thing that's a gatekeeping club either. You can have people with lots of different experiences of disability, and that I qualified. So now I tend to just say disabled, but I am also chronically ill, so
it is both. And I think what you say about using the word disabled is so true, because I think for a long time, and I've said this before and I know I'll say it again, is that for a very, very long time, far too long, is that society has equated disabled with inadequate. And because for whatever reason, if you acquire your disability or if you're born disabled, using the word disabled suddenly deemed you as an inadequate. And it's now actually the reason that I've called the podcast Disabled and Proud, is to reclaim that power of the word disability, because actually disabled doesn't mean inadequate at all. It's almost just signposting you to know that actually this body is not the same as everybody else's, but that doesn't mean it's any less worthy.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, it's a label, like you label height, you label hair color. It's a similar label. Obviously different things, if you've got paler skin, you might need a bit more sun cream. It's the same thing. If you're disabled, you might need certain different things than able-bodied or non-disabled people. but it's not inherently bad, and it doesn't make you any less adequate, as you say.
Yeah, exactly.
But like I would agree that the number one question that like really irritates me is the what happened sort of questions. I think we're semi-similar in age, because I also remember when that happened, and people, I think, wanted this big tragic story. And when I come out and say, oh, I was born with it, I'm like, they're like disappointed because I didn't fulfill their curiosity. I didn't fulfill their need for drama. And I'm like, disability is not here to entertain you. Like, the heck.
This exactly, like, this is literally giving me goosebumps, because that's exactly what it is. There was no tragic story. Also, it's a hell of an intrusive question. Like, had something had happened, I'm not necessarily sure I would speak to a random stranger about it. But it's because it's so intrusive as well. And it's also, like you said, it can be seen as a form of entertainment. And disability is not for entertainment purposes. Like, my body is not here to entertain you or make you feel better about your own body.
No, and I think, honestly, that second thing that you just said, make you feel better about your own body, I think that is like a real big player in it, because I think the question feeds from a place of fear. I think people see people that look visibly different and they're like, oh my gosh, how did this happen to this person? How can I avoid it happening to me? And that speaks to a lot of the negative beliefs about disability in general, and how like disability is like this, it's worse than death, and like all of these really negative viewpoints. And I'm just like, how do we fix that? Because until we take the fear out of disability, that question is not going away.
No, never.
I went out on my motorbike on a Sunday, so Sunday the 31st of May of 2009. I collided with the central reservation, ripped my arm and shoulder off, broke both my ankles, smashed my left forearm to absolute bits and pieces, and woke up sort of two days later in the Royal London at Whitechapel, an arm and shoulder lighter, my legs in bandages, and my arm suspended from a pole with fixators into it. What I didn't know, and what everyone else could see, was I was reclusive. I was depressed. It was an August morning, and I got out of the shower and I caught my reflection in the mirror, and I was like a bit overweight. I was gaunt, unkempt. I was grey. I had no colour to me whatsoever. Coupled with 15 pence to my name, I was just, what I looked in the mirror, what have I really got to look forward to? Like, I've been through enough, and I've done it all and adjusted. I've taken everything that life's thrown at me, and I've essentially caught it and thrown it back. If this is what life's got in store for me after everything I've been through, I'd really rather not be part of it. And so I went back into my room, shut the door, and I got halfway. I tried hanging myself. I got halfway through doing it.
Oh my goodness.
Halfway through doing it, and then for whatever reason, the thought of my mum finding me had come over me. Like, what's mum going to do when she finds me? You think of all the bad things that go on in life.
Yeah.
Poverty, cancer, terminal illness in general. I've just lost my arm and shoulder. Yes, that's really bad, but we can adapt and overcome to that. So
yeah. In the grand scheme of things, actually, missing in the grand scheme of things, missing your arm and shoulder is not like the be all or end.
I mean, the worst it can get for me, I can't clap. There's bigger problems to have, isn't there? So I've done quite well out of having a disability, in the experiences that I've had and been able to take part in stuff. So
because you've taken part in quite a lot, haven't you? And I think I remember so vividly. I can't remember what the TV show was called, but it was like Naked Beach or Nude Beach or something like that. And I remember so vividly seeing you on it, and I remember being like, oh my god, he looks like me. Like, obviously not exactly the same.
I had a beard and all sorts at the time.
And I remember being like, oh my goodness, there's like, and I think you were like the only disabled body on that show, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. And then I think you were involved in Invictus Games as well, weren't you? So you have had quite like a lucrative career out of this.
I mean, a career is like, that's a nice word. That's kind of if only it was a career, but I guess you are right. but it's not always been
of course not.
sunshine and daisies and sausage and beans all day long. Naked Beach was an opportunity that came around 2018, but the Invictus Games, which I did shortly after, a few months after we wrapped filming that, the Invictus Games was really the how I got into cycling, really. So spoiler alert, I'm a cyclist, so the sense of achievement that I got out of just doing that one ride, I went, cycling's going to be my thing. I'm going to be a cyclist. What can I do in cycling that's something to write home about?
I think disabled people are the most creative people in the world. I think that there's so much creativity and problem solving and speculation required in like finding what works for your body, and especially with the added challenges of being a disabled person and disabled people in societies that aren't necessarily built for disabled people. So I think that mentality actually equips disabled people to be much better at this kind of like creative alternative career path. And I think it frees disabled people are more free in that way.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And it's so interesting. I literally just had a conversation with someone about how the trope of the disabled person is like, oh, you're quite meek and mild, and maybe you're like in the corner and like you don't necessarily like speak all that much. And when I look at every single disabled person I know, it's wrong. Like every single disabled person I know is probably pretty loud, is probably like very up for standing up for their own rights. And actually you're so right when you say that, very creative, because naturally we've had to be problem solvers. So regardless of what the situation is, we know how to handle that situation in a way that benefits us rather than like your average able-bodied Steve.
Yeah, for sure. And I really do like this kind of new stereotype that you're speaking of that's coming out of like these kind of disabled girls that are like really loud and like really intense because like they've had to be speaking up for so long. Mm-hmm. And I really like that. And there's also like I'm not sure if you follow Crutches and Spice, but it's like a really great resource. And she made a joke one time where she was like, I don't know about you, but have you ever noticed all amputees are super chaotic? It was like a video of like her friend waving her leg around. And I was like, oh yeah, I think that might be really true. Like there's something about being able to like assemble yourself and disassemble that might make you a bit more like prone to a kind of chaos those around you aren't used to.
I actually have never thought about that before. And like, I actually think that might be bang on. Like, I'm not an amputee, so that's not my lived experience. But like, I have had a fake arm, and like, I have thrown it into the center of a nightclub on Halloween and been like, oh my God, like, what's happened? Breaking your hip is like, that's a big bone to break. Like, do you mind if I ask how you did it? Did you fall off a chair? Like what happened?
I did not fall off a chair. No. It was on track actually. I had a competition. It was the first competition of the season, and I'd felt a little bit of strain in my hip like the weeks before in training.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, we'll just see how this goes. Not thinking anything of it really. And when you're younger, especially if you do a lot of sport and a lot of kind of weight related exercise, your muscles can get a lot stronger than your bones.
Yeah.
So I had really, really strong quad muscles apparently. And when I came up my blocks, my quad pulled off part of my hip. And then it just absolutely crunched it from there when I put my foot down, obviously, because when you're a sprinter, you put so much power through the floor. So obviously my ball pulled off part of my bone, and then I stomped down on the floor to try and accelerate, and it just, whoa.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, don't even, like, I never thought pain like that existed. Whew.
Oh yeah, I can my hips now feel really funny.
But do you know, my hips still was like the part of the hip that got pulled off never sort of, I don't know if it was meant to refuse or like kind of generate back. I don't know, but like my hips are really uneven now. They look a bit weird apparently.
That's just what you want to hear as well.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, you look weird now, mate. You got this like debilitating injury and you look weird as well.
Yeah, like thank you so much for that.
Cheers.
I was wondering,
Appreciate it.
do you have any like myths around like vision or being blind that you want to quickly dispel whilst you're here?
Do you know what? I think that's the biggest problem, like with disability in general in society, is the stereotyping.
Oh, yeah.
And like the myths, for me, they're the ones that really grind my gears. I think some like innocent myths, like our senses are super heightened. That one's not true. Like we just, if me and you did a hearing test, we'd probably have the same score. Do you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah.
I'm naturally better at using what hearing I've got.
Yeah.
Other myths. I guess the myth that we just walk around with shit in our pants all the time because we don't wipe properly. That's probably one.
I went to a trade fair and I was walking around this trade fair and there was a stand selling, and everyone laughed with this, vibrating rubber ducks that were a sex toy, but because of this show, they could get away with it. And they're a brand called I Rub My Ducky. They're still in existence. They're an American company and they're a vibrating rubber duck. I usually have one on the shelf. I do have one on the shelf behind me, actually.
Oh my God.
This is the Pride version.
Unreal.
And so obviously it's a very discreet vibrator. And when I was talking to the people on the stand and they were saying, oh, we have other stuff, but we can't show it on the main stand, which I'd like to come and have a look. And there was a load of vibrators and some other sex toys on the stand. I thought, that's brilliant. I wouldn't mind doing that.
Yeah.
And that was where my story into like the sex toy industry started. So I started a store then. And so I started doing that, and it became very apparent over the first 4 to 5 years trading was a lot of the sex toys weren't accessible for people with dexterity issues. And I was always looking for something that could help people with disabilities. So I then started concentrating on looking for products that were what I deemed accessible. And I spent a lot of time researching products, looking at them, getting them in, seeing how a lot of people just think it's to do with the buttons, but for me it isn't. It can be like the packaging, the instructions, the textures, the colors. There's a lot, you've got to look at so many, even the smells. There's a lot of people who don't like the smell of certain materials.
Yeah.
So I spent my time looking at things like that. And then the pandemic hit, and which was brilliant for business because everyone was staying at home. But
everyone was bored and needed a vibrator.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking, I'm getting a bit bored though. So I started some work with a UK charity called Enhance the UK, who do about sex and disability. And then I decided to qualify as a sex educator as well. And I think working with bigger companies, I can have a bigger impact. So I now work with sex toy companies looking at how to make their products accessible and how we can talk to more people in the disabled community. Because for me, sex and disability is a massive taboo.
Yeah.
You know, I speak to so many people from the ages of 20 right up to 70 who have had no sex education. And that could be because sex education is crap in schools, in mainstream schools anyway. But it's even in a lot of SEN schools, it's just non-existent, or they have to do some now, but until say 18 months ago, they could get away with teaching nothing. And I get so frustrated when I speak to someone, for example, in their 50s, who is still very naive on a lot of sexual health topics. So I'm quite happy to talk to people, give them advice, tell them about products. So it can be anything from, what condoms are accessible, or even talking to people about going into a sexual health clinic, because these are not always accessible. You see videos on Instagram, people trying to go for a smear test, for example, and they can't even get into the doctors. So we need to have these open conversations. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing now.
I was recently speaking to someone on this podcast who explained to me, and I hadn't really thought about like how we work, as in like the 9 to 5. And the reason that the 9 to 5 is the 9 to 5 harks back to the Victorian Revolution. And I was thinking about it and I was like, oh my goodness, that is exactly like, we have not changed. We have not evolved with the times when it comes to like the working schedule. So traditionally, if you're working, it's like your 9 to 5 or your 8 till 4. That is your working hours. And that's because in the Victorian times, that's when there was daylight, because they didn't have electricity.
It's crazy. And like, COVID came and it was so devastating for people, and the effects, you know, it's not worth thinking about what some people went through during that time. But there were some good things about COVID. If you look at it from an outside perspective, you know, we all learned to work virtually, and as a society, we better understood caring for people in our communities and checking on our friends and checking on our neighbors, and understanding that people are more vulnerable in society. I don't particularly like the word vulnerable, but using it for this kind of situation. And as we came out of COVID, I sort of sat there and was like, this feels like a real turning point. This feels like people get it now, like people understand, and we've opened up a whole world of technology and being virtual and us being comfortable in our own homes. Fast forward a year and a half and it's all gone again. It's all going again, and we're going straight back to how we were. I was sort of sat there knocking my head saying, why are we not adopting the lessons we learned during that time of national crisis and taking something good from what we all went through? But we're not. And it's so frustrating, because it really felt like a glimmer of hope for some disabled people that actually said, now everyone gets it. Now everybody understands. Now everybody's having to operate like how I operate on a daily basis. And they're really understanding now. And it's going again. And we've gone back to, like you said, this kind of Victorian entrenched method of working. And it's frustrating.